Let's talk about something that you're used to covering in your time in Sacramento. That's another coaching change.
Yeah.
It's down to 3. You got Clifford, Brown, Jackson.
Are we sure, by the way? Like,
whoa,
what?
Breaking news! Do we got some breaking news? Sean is confirming that there's more. What do we have?
Definitely not worthy of that stinger. No, I don't know. I mean, I've heard a lot of people say finalists. I've also heard a lot of people just say they've advanced to the next round of interviews. And I said this on just last week, where I don't mean to sound disrespectful, and this probably is, but like and I'm not trying to sound like I'm making fun of the organization, but they come out and they say it's going to be a process-driven coaching search. Okay. There's no rush in trying to get your head coach between now and June. I mean, you got so much time before the draft. You've got a pretty good foundation in place with this front office, I feel, so the coach you'd want to probably be a part of that, but things change so quickly in the NBA, and you still have teams that are competing in the playoffs, and you can still talk to their people as they have famously. But is Quinn Snyder going to keep his job? Is James Brick?
I know he's not going to come to Sacramento. But here's my only question to you: when you said, like, can't you be more patient? Because I was on that same boat, but then at the same time I go, now isn't there competition with like the Lakers, and if something does open with the Jazz, and then you got
the Hornets.
Yeah, like, isn't that a little
sure? If you find the guy you want, absolutely. I mean, that's the 100%. Like, but again, my job is to sit here and poke holes. Like I will ask questions, I'll poke holes, and look, and the reality is the people I might mention, like David Vanderpool, Sam Cassell, Terry Stotts, like either they may not have interest in you or you may not have interest in them already. So that is very possible. So that could be part of it. But when I saw the list, I kind of expected a little bit more. So I said, meh, just because there wasn't, there was certainly people that I'd be comfortable if an organization, if the Kings decided to hire some of those people, I would have been like, yeah, okay, great. But I also think that there's other candidates that I would have considered. Not to say they didn't. I'm just, when you get down to those 3, so much has a way of happening. And I just kind of harken back to the Dave Yeager day when they interviewed so many people. And the minute Dave Yeager became available, he was in town the next day.
That's a great point. It just came out of nowhere. There was all these other names. Mike Woodson, right? Mike Woodson was one of those.
Benny Del Negro. Yeah. You had a lot of, and again, I know people hate
Ime
that
Udoka.
Word. Yeah. And I know people hate that word retread, right? But
yeah,
I don't. I think that
right.
Wait, so anyone that coaches one time is a retread. Okay.
People just hate the term, and it's like, then don't use it.
Right. I mean, and I said last week we did this thing where it was, and I think James stole the idea from you guys, which was if you have to,
what do you say?
No, it's like, okay. Who do you like and who do you think they would get? Like, who would you hire? And of the 7 and who do you think they would hire? And my guess for who I thought they would hire, I thought they would give Charles Lee a little bit more, consideration, or maybe, who knows, maybe he pulled himself out. Does it, I don't think anyone likes to know how the sausage gets made. At the end of the day, you find your coach. But I thought the one that they would hire would be Mike Brown. So I'm still kind of in on it. Excuse me, the one I said I think I would hire would be Mike Brown.
Yes.
Now, do I think they will? I don't know. I mean, to be honest, I with the Warriors right now in the playoffs, my Alain and me kind of being in this transition, because today's actually my first day at Channel 40.
Yay!
I know it's gotten in the way a little bit, so we'll see. And if these are finalists, that's great, but I think it's also quite possible, and I wouldn't be totally surprised. So I throw it out there as if fans, if all of a sudden a Phil Handy or David Vanderpool or Sam Cassell, so somebody just comes out of nowhere, James Borrego, who just got let go in Charlotte, if all of a sudden there's like we're going to interview them too, I wouldn't have the knee-jerk reaction of, whoa, I didn't see that coming, because these are final, what I mean? So it's like, again, this is the next round of interviews. They're supposed to be in person. You could call them a finalist. That's fine. And I made sure to kind of make a distinction in my report for it. But in all likelihood, you probably have your next head coach in these 3.
Do you think the departure of Joe Dumars, which we saw today, Shams had reported, do you think that's going to change anything, or do you think we're looking too much into that? Because you're talking about now, like, I don't know if these are actually the finalists. And then you have Joe Dumars depart as of hours ago. And now I'm feeling like maybe there is a way that there could be more. Do you think that's going to change anything?
Well, it definitely changes the voices in the room because he was so influential. I think I don't think that it's something that the Kings didn't know before last week. I mean, I think they knew that Joe Dumars would probably be leaving. I don't think it's catching anybody off guard this morning, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Other than maybe the fan base, but again, this is like your Chris Mullen, right? When Vivek took over and this was the advisor role, they have a different churched up name for it. And I would say his biggest strategy was declining media requests for interviews because as much as he is a legend but again, for somebody to have that type of role, it was just always odd, especially if you're a Hall of Famer within the organization. To not talk to the media is a bold strategy. And that's no slight on the Kings. It's not like the Kings kept him in a dungeon and said, you will not talk to the media. He was very present. I mean, you guys would see him at games, you would see him at practices. He'd be talking to a lot of people within the organization. He'd have his son around and he's a gentleman. I mean, the guy's great. So I was always hoping to someday be able to talk to him. And I thought, well, maybe things will just get a little bit better. Maybe they just have to get some sort of upward momentum before he decides he wants to do that. And the tragedy is he never did. So good for him. He's off to a pretty great role though within the within the NBA. So that's a good thing for him.
We should go candidate by candidate a little bit now that we're down to maybe 3. Sean, I don't know, Sean. Maybe there's a secret guy that's coming out of nowhere.
Maybe I have the appetite for more. How about that?
I think some people have that same appetite. Mark Jackson is a name that obviously comes with a lot of controversy. I think you have, some of the fan base that's like, no way, this is awful, can't happen. You have some, they're like, hey man, like he did a good job in his 3 years with the Warriors. Players really dug him. There's just a lot that comes with Mark Jackson. And I think we've all chronicled it on other podcasts, but where are you at with him as a candidate and kind of the conversation that's being had about him?
Yeah, I do think Mark Jackson should have a shot at being a head coach again. If someone wants to hire him and look beyond some of the ugliness that's been around there, I think time has passed and I think people grow. And I think, look, that was his first time being a head coach and he's coming from being a player where he was practically a head coach on the floor. And certainly things didn't go well. Some things did. But I also feel like I think the confidence that the league has in Mark Jackson, putting him on the flagship broadcast of all of their games, if it was something that was truly a concern, he wouldn't be there. And so I think people have done their due diligence. I think he's eloquated him. I think he's been able to be eloquent in the way he describes certain things. And I think I would like to see a little bit, maybe some more accountability on his end, but at the same time, behind closed doors, I think he acknowledges some of the shortcomings. And I think that it's much akin to John Gruden. And I don't mean the controversy stuff. I think it's a guy who, had this very, very public head coaching persona, goes into broadcasting. And when you're on the flagship station and on the flagship of the league for games, it's hard to leave that. I mean, Jeff Van Gundy hasn't left it either. And he's obviously a little longer in the tooth, but Jeff Van Gundy has interviewed for head coaching gigs too. I think something has to be almost a really perfect situation for him to leave. Now, if I'm the Sacramento Kings, with saying all that, I just think that they're in a place and their time in the organization where I could see Mark Jackson helping them. I just don't think it's the right move per se. I think a lot of that, there's just too much noise there that if you're making this head coaching hire, to me, I think there's probably a few more candidates that are more qualified, who certainly have a track record there. And it's certainly, look, they'll be all about their splash, but I think you're making the splash for the wrong reason at that point. So I think that there's definitely a decision to be made. Certainly getting his name even as a finalist is going to help him, his candidacy in the future. But, Mark Jackson's not stepping away to be an assistant coach anywhere. And so it's got to be a real, people have said, after being a Warriors head coach, how he's never shown an interest to get on anyone's bench. It's like, well, why would you leave what you have? That's nonsense. So, I like what he can do. I just don't think it would be the right move for Sacramento, given where they're at right now, and especially within their history. You don't need a cringeworthy hire. You need to make the right hire.
Yeah, and although it could be splashy,
right,
it may not be splashy in the great way.
Yeah,
right? Like, it's not like,
if you're the
splashy, there's water. It could be like acid being splashed.
Oh, wow. Acid.
How about this? If you're the Pacers, it makes more sense, right? Like, if you're not only does he have a tie to your organization, you've had a taste of the playoffs, you'd like to get back there, you're kind of rebuilding a little bit. To me, that one would make more sense because I think the water would be a lot warmer than being in California.
Yeah,
being in California. Capital, right?
I feel like too, a lot of people are being like, a lot of these guys with Mike Brown or Steve Clifford, it's the safe pick. Where Mark Jackson, people aren't seen as the safe pick, but at the same time, I don't know. I just think that direction of going with a coach who has been out of the game for so long, you have to be so sure on what they can do and what they accomplish when you're the Kings organization. If you're another organization, you can take that risk with a first year guy that hasn't been around on coaching staffs for a while. So I do think Mark Jackson deserves another chance in the NBA. Absolutely. But I just don't see why that has to be with the Sacramento Kings when they have been losing and out of the playoffs for 16 years.
And the pushback on this, and I'm not saying I agree with it, but I'm sure this is how they look at it. When Mark Jackson took over the Warriors,
right,
they were not in a great spot, right? You had Steph Curry dealing with injuries. There's a lot going on. And based on what these players have said is he helped establish an identity in a culture, at least within the locker room.
Yep.
Now, did it become divisive at times, especially with the front office and other things? Yes, but he's also pushed back on some of the stuff that's been out there. I went back, listened to some interviews, and he said it was not true that he barred Jerry West from practice. Now, others say he did. He has addressed some of this stuff. He says it's inaccurate, but there's a lot of smoke here. However, I think from a Kings perspective, they're like, hey, what's our identity?
Mm-hmm.
It's chaos. On the floor, what's our identity? We don't really have one. We have like Fox, we have Sabonis. What's our identity? They could view it that they are establishing something with Mark Jackson because he has done it before with a different team. I don't know. I could be wrong on that.
Oh, and I agree with a lot of those things. But it also, another cynic could sit there and say, man, you coached over a decade ago.
Yeah.
Like you changed a lot of ways, but golly, look around the league. Like, this is a player-driven league, and if you lose the respect, I made this, all the smoke that you talked about, Deuce, even if you take away half of it, there's still some stuff in there that's, oh my gosh, that's pretty concerning, right?
Sure.
Even if half of it isn't true, let's pretend half of it is true, and I'm not going to say which is and which isn't. We don't need to do that. But when you're a coach, and let me throw out some of the names that were around, like the Will Hardys of the world. I think Kings fans really fell in love with that one for some reason. And then
they didn't know him 2 weeks ago, but man, Will Hardy is the guy.
Right. All of a sudden they're like, that's the guy I want. Why? You couldn't identify him in a room if not for a YouTube video.
I shouldn't say Kings fans. It's some people. I mean, even James Ham was.
No, I know. I poke fun. But you get these guys where it's going to be a first-time head coach. If you're a head coach and you're going from the whole Eric Spoelstra, Taylor Jenkins, Nick Nurse, these guys who have kind of paid their dues and have done every role imaginable within a basketball organization, right? And I think that's what's appealing about Will Hardy, aside from the fact that he comes from the Popovich tree. Certainly, I get it.
Yeah.
So if you're pulling from that, okay, that means you're a coach with no playing experience or without professional playing experience, and you're coming over into a league where automatically it's a con. If you have your pros and cons, it's a con because you have to gain your respect of your players. And immediately when you're not a former player, it's a tough hurdle to get over. That being said, when you're a former player, a legend, in my opinion, like Mark Jackson is, and you already have that cachet, and then somehow, be it for whatever reason, you've lost the respect of players within the locker room. That's hard to get back. It's almost harder for a player, in my opinion, with that who has done the blood, sweat, and tears of a player. It's almost harder for him to gain the respect of the locker room back after losing it than it is for somebody who never played the game to get that respect. Because again, if you lose that respect, well, they didn't have respect for you anyway, right? Like, they didn't respect you on that level. So it's harder for them to make that hurdle. If you lose that respect as a player already having that cachet, that's concerning to me. So again, these are types of the things where, again, I don't think it's too much to overcome, but the smoke and the concern and I think there's a huge gap in employment. Like, if you're filling any job, gap in employment is why do you have this guy? Granted, he's got a great gig. He does, but it does remove him a little bit from today's players.
I think the other thing that has to be brought up, and that's a great point, Sean, is you mentioned the gap in employment too, as a head coach or even a coach. What has he done during this gap to improve as a coach?
Yeah.
Like, one thing that was he got a lot of criticism of, and especially in that final year with Golden State, is the offense, man, kind of sluggish, right? Especially for the pieces they had. Their offense was kind of a letdown. He leaves, their offense absolutely takes off. Now, some of that is just players maturing too and becoming better and better. But like, it wasn't that free-flowing offense that we saw the next year under Steve Kerr. It was completely different. I think the other thing is, has he spent time with other teams? Like, we look at the other candidate, Mike Brown. Mike Brown's been in it. He may have not been a head coach since 2014, but he coached the Warriors in the 2017 playoffs. He was spending time with the Spurs when he wasn't coaching. Then he gets this gig. Like, he's been in the thick of things. He's had to evolve. He's been around different personalities, different coaches. Well, Mark Jackson has that 3-year run. What else has he done? Now, he's got the experience as a player. He's got the experience as a broadcaster, but what has he done during this time to improve?
And I feel like not only that, it's people do get bothered by the fact, like, oh, you say you want something, but do you just want it handed to you? Like you just said, Deuce, what are you doing to better that part of you as a coach, or to show that you want to be a coach, rather than just saying, I want to be a rock star, and you grab a guitar and then you never practice? It's like, I want to be a coach. Well, what are you doing to practice and get better at it? I just don't. And that's where I feel like people can criticize this whole Mark Jackson situation anywhere in the league. But all the other stuff, you got to believe that a human can change.
For sure. The other part that really bothered me, and it bothered me at the time, like, Michael Malone comes to Sacramento, and the thing he's credited with most was like, oh, this was the real guy behind the scenes. And I was like, man, that's just a terrible look. Like, what is Mark Jackson doing that really so many people within the Warriors organization is even saying this? I didn't like it because, look, you could say Michael Malone was a hell of a coach coming over, and he's well respected, and he's going to be a great head coach, and that bears fruit. That turns out to be the right thing. However, to sit there and say that he's the mastermind of everything, he's actually the one coaching the Warriors, he's the one that Mark Jackson relies on the most, and you basically have this figurehead in Mark Jackson, and everything else is Michael Malone doing everything else. It's like, I didn't think that was fair to Mark, but why do you have that noise? And again, it is your first time as an NBA head coach. It was his first gig, not only for Malone, but for Mark Jackson. So, yeah, it's just too much of that smoke, as Deuce said, and that it clouds everything else around it. And it's like, look, I would be very confident in Mark Jackson trying to turn things around for the most part, but I just feel like they could do and should do so much better.
I want to ask about one of the other coaching candidates now, with Steve Clifford, before we get to the best coaching candidate in these finalists, which is Mike Brown in my eyes.
Oh, we agree.
Yeah, yes, we do, Sean. Let's get to the unsexy pick, Steve Clifford.
Oh, he's Mr. Sexy.
No, and that's the thing. I like Steve Clifford. Deuce likes Steve. We are Steve Clifford fans, but when you're talking about these 3 finalists, why the hell aren't we talking about him as a serious candidate? I feel like he's the one that they're going to fall upon and be like, all right, I guess it's you, in my opinion.
I like Steve Clifford to a degree. My only thing is, I think what really hurts him and it's my biggest concern, is the health scares that he's had. And part of that, I think, is how much he invests in his team and how much he gets in there. And he's obviously known for taking teams that are bad and helping them get into that first round of the playoffs. But I just, again, much like he and Mike Brown are very similar in a lot of ways. They're both a lot about structure. Mike Brown is an over the top OCD type coach where it is just strange. Like, he is a
amazing,
brilliant human being, great gentleman of a person, but also has, when it comes to detail and when it comes to, I remember when Michael Malone was the head coach of the Kings, and people used to tell me how OCD he was, to where you could literally move a pen in the office and just move it off and he'd be like, why'd you move that? Like, he would know, he would have that. Mike Brown is that on steroids. So I fully expect, like, and I haven't been around him a ton as a head coach, but I've always wanted to watch him because of the things that I've known about and heard about, and does he close the door 3 times like I've seen in Matchstick Men with Nicolas Cage, where he's playing this OCD type? Stupid. Like, I want to see if that's the type of thing that happens. But just kidding there, obviously. But it's still seeing him around Golden State, seeing what he has been able to do in so many different facets of NBA coaching. Like, I don't even think you have characteristics of this is Mike Brown as a coach when it comes to a system, because I think he's adaptable. I think he can take his team, look around it.
The best coaches are adaptable. Greg Popovich has shifted the way he's coached and the style in which he's played for years. Steve
100%.
Kerr.
Can I just say, too, I asked you about Steve Clifford, and you already started
Yes,
talking about Mike Brown,
Thank you.
that is my damn point, Sean. That's what we're all doing.
We are, but I mean, again, to me, I just have to cross him off the list, because if he's going to come in as your, and this is just me talking, and this is the decision that I would make if I was doing things.
Yeah.
The health stuff is a real concern. Like, why would I put a guy who's had this history of, and he'd probably kick my ass right now, and probably could, saying he's fine, but I think he'd probably be better suited as somebody on a bench where it's not like that pressure goes away. But him and Mike Brown famously worked together before, so this could be a Monty McNair, Wes Wilcox situation where he comes in and maybe the two of them are combining their efforts to form Voltron or something. I do think that, I look, if it was Steve Clifford and that's your hire, okay, that I get it, and I don't take away from the again, it's not that he's unsexy about as a position, but it would be a hard sell to me when you're doing this process search, and this is the guy you landed on, who I think is a brilliant coach, but I just don't think he'd be the right fit for this type of team. I could be completely wrong, and I would imagine there's probably people within the Kings front office cringing at that, but they're clearly, in these candidates, leaning on experience, and Steve Clifford definitely brings that. I think whatever it takes, I would take Mike Brown more. But would I take him? Like, if I was to rank them, yeah, I would put Steve Clifford higher than Mark Jackson, in my opinion. I would definitely go that route. But there's other routes that if if it's Steve Clifford, why not reach out for somebody else, right? Why not find that other person may sit this, again, like you mentioned, other jobs become available. I think the Quinn Snyder thing is much akin to Ben Simmons. I think a lot of people might want to, if I'm a team, I might want to see what happens with him first, because of the possibilities it could open. And frankly, if you've got interest in these 3 as your finalists, are they really going to be gone? Like, this isn't right. Somebody you have to wrap up anytime soon. Mike Brown is preparing for a deep playoff run right now. Mark Jackson's got the broadcasting gig that's going to take him through June, so he's not going anywhere. And yeah, maybe you lose Steve Clifford to a bench, or maybe he gets hired somewhere else. I don't know. I just don't.
But you're right. Others could be. I mean, James Borrego. The list came out for the Kings. The initial 7-person list came out the day Borrego got let go by Charlotte. That's an interesting name. Like, he helped turn the Hornets around, right? They increased their win total. That's someone you would probably talk about. Again, another guy from the Popovich tree.
Right.
I mean, who knows what happens?
And he could be that successor, And what happens? That's it. I think everyone looks at Quinn Snyder, and I think there's some people that go, "Oh, he's going to go to the Lakers." Or they sit there and say, oh, they buy into him being upset with the way that they treated Frank Vogel. Frank Vogel's another name that's out there, and I think Frank Vogel's a hell of a coach.
Yeah.
If you were to ask
what
me
if Doc Rivers comes available,
100%, and I would definitely want to talk to him. I think there's also ways of, there's only like 3 agents that represent like the entire league's coaches and executives. So I do feel like there's a way of saying, hey, Doc Rivers and Quinn Snyder aren't available at the moment. But if they were, hey, Sacramento, you have no shot. So I think sometimes those types of discussions can be had. I don't know if that's true or not, that Sacramento would have no shot. But I do feel, and again, they may not have interest in them either. And I think that's worth pointing out. Kenny Atkinson famously wasn't a part of the 7, as I think a lot of people were expecting. Even myself, I thought that he'd probably get an interview. Also a guy who's down here at Golden State, but there are reasons for that. So just because a guy has a great name and something that, it just may not be a good fit. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing what the week ahead looks like. But I just like to point out that there are, not that they're not doing their due diligence, but to me, what's the rush? So
if you were, this is strictly a prediction, what order do you think the Kings have it right now?
Oh God.
Yes.
My prediction is they have it Brown, Jackson, Clifford. My prediction. Not based on anything.
So I don't know. I honestly don't know. So I mean, if I'm just trying to go from what my gut tells me.
Yeah.
I would say I would be very shocked if Steve Clifford was truly a finalist. I think for what I mean by that is I think when it comes to Steve Clifford, I think it's really Mike Brown and Mark Jackson. And I think Steve Clifford might get like a or associate head coach with Mike Brown.
Down.
Possibly even with a Mark Jackson because Mark Jackson's going to need a lot of help. So yes. I think it's really, here's the people we're talking to. This is a way to get Clifford possibly some more money, a little bit more clout within the whatever gig he lands. Because I would be really shocked if they went with Steve Clifford. I really would. So I really think it's a 2-man race. But that being said, that's just a gut feeling on my end. I don't know that for sure. So I would probably agree with the fact that it would be Mike Brown and Mark Jackson, just because I can't imagine if they're doing this the way that most people would hope they were, where you're listening to your basketball people. I would imagine Mike Brown would be the favorite horse in that race.
I'm really curious, and maybe this will come out at some point, but why none of those assistants, like someone like Darvin Ham, didn't advance to the next stage. Yeah. And I know there's so many factors, and we kind of talked about it the other day when it first came out. It could have been like the two sides talked, and Darvin was like, yeah, I don't really want this gig.
100%.
He could have pulled out. He may be looking at the Lakers gig. He may be, I don't want to go to Sacramento, or Sacramento didn't like him. I don't know. Darvin has interviewed for other gigs too, going back to last season, and obviously did not get those. He's still with the Bucks, but did that surprise you that none of the assistants made the finalist list?
Not really. Only because of all those, they're coming from such great teams. And I think if you were to identify some of the finalists or some of the up and coming soon to be head coaches in the league, they'd be probably atop of the list. So there's only 30 gigs. And if you're highly sought after, or you're somebody who's everyone's thinking has head coaching aspirations and abilities, I just don't know why you would settle on Sacramento necessarily, when there could be some better situations out there. Or even if you're somebody like Charles Lee, for example, Darvin Ham will probably be a head coach next year. So if Darvin Ham has an opportunity to go to the Lakers, well, I mean, sorry, Kings fans, like, it's still LA. It's still the Lakers. He has the opportunity to coach LeBron. There's still people that think that they should have been an NBA Finals caliber team, and you still have Anthony Davis there. So that's better than Sacramento at the moment. And so if that's the case, and now Charles Lee, who's thought of in the same realm of being one of those up and coming assistants that could be an NBA head coach, well, you're still with Mike Budenholzer, and you move up a spot, and you're still on an NBA championship caliber team. and you're still very, very, very young. Same thing with Will Hardy. You're with the Celtics, and you've joined Ime Udoka over there, and you're doing some good things. All of a sudden, they turned around their season. I don't think Will Hardy has to jump at the first gig that becomes available. Not to say that the Kings are, but I think that could be some more attractive options down the road. You want it to be the right fit, especially when it's your first head coaching gig.
Yeah.
There are other coaches who have been through this stuff before.
Yeah.
And Darvin Ham has. I mean, Darvin Ham has been a guy who has interviewed a lot, and now it seems like he's on the precipice of becoming an NBA head coach, and I think it'll happen. But I think there's just more attractive gigs out there. There are stuff like Kenny Atkinson, who when he got his first head coaching gig, that seemed to be a moment where he had to kind of jump at the opportunity that became available, because he had been through it so many times, and either for whatever reason it just didn't work out. Byron Scott famously did that as well. So I think when you're somebody like these younger guys, especially on elite caliber coaching benches, in my opinion, you have the luxury of being able to take your time with it. And I think interviewing is always something that's good, because it'll all get your name out there. It'll build some bridges for you. And sometimes you can be blown away. And I think that it's very possible if the organization wanted to kick the tires on some stuff, but I think honestly, it looks like they're definitely leaning into head coaching experience. And I think that's a smart play with the team that you're trying to assemble around a 25, soon to be 26-year-old all-star in Domantas Sabonis. I think they want to be able to build a style that's going to be cohesive with this group, with him and Fox. Not to say that a young up and coming head coach can't do that, but I think you're going to lean into the head coaching experience a little bit more.
Last one for you guys. Do you think the NBA should step in and tell the Sacramento Kings that they're not allowed to hire anyone who has coached with the Warriors? Because that's all they do.
All right.
Rick Adelman, Gary St. Jean, Rick Adelman, Eric Musselman, Keith Smart.
You know what's funny?
Luke Walton,
Sean,
Alvin Gentry, Michael Malone. That's like 7, 8 guys.
The fact that you can name all those guys and like nothing has really worked out, it doesn't fall on all those guys, right? Like it literally falls a lot on the organization, just firing them, not having patience. Or some falls on some of those guys, whatever. But at the same time, I still feel like it's the right start to keep going with places that like obviously there's a winning culture or something good going on for them. So no, the NBA. No, to answer your question, no, the NBA should not step in. Sean.
Yeah, it's just weird. It is. It's
funny,
just
right?
It's so weird, and you could certainly make that accusation among Vivek, but it's, as you pointed out, Deuce, there's so many examples of it before that, before he even got there, just within Kings history. And maybe it's because you happen to see that team so often because they're right down the road and they're just easy to see, and maybe you just end up you get your full sample size as opposed to a smaller sample size of what's just on TV. I don't know. It is just, I think it's just one of those things, man. You can't explain it one way or the other. The Warriors tree is certainly large when it comes to Sacramento. It's part of the roots here. So some of those have worked out mighty well though. So I don't know how to, if they did it, it doesn't mean the person sucks.
No,
you know?
no, for sure.